I feel like a lot of what the current astrology and future astrology going into 2026 is really showing us that empathy is a finite resource. Um, and it's a tricky thing because we don't want to repress our empathy. We don't want to constrict it because we don't want to numb our empathy, of course. But we don't want to overextend our empathy as well, especially for people who don't show empathy and compassion for others. I think that this is really indicative with Pluto and Aquarius, of course, and also with Uranus and Gemini. We've had Uranus and Gemini since July of 2025, and Uranus will continue to stay there until November, when Uranus is going to station retrograde back into Taurus and stay there until April 2026. And then we're going to have Uranus permanently in Gemini until 2033. We also have Saturn in Pisces until February 2026. Saturn has retrograded. So we're getting the Saturn stationed retrograde on September 1st back into Pisces, where it's going to remain until, like I said, February 2026. So we have this last leg of Saturn in Pisces alongside the nodal axis on Pisces, right? We have the North Node in Pisces with the South Node in Virgo. And so what this is telling us is that there is this maturation of, I think, the energy of the North Node in Pisces with Saturn in Pisces for the rest of 2025 is really showing us that when it comes to feeling deeply, there has to still be discipline. There has to, we can't allow it to consume us, right? Because the North Node really represents what is out of reach. And when we continue to try to chase the lessons of the North Node, it can kind of become a dragon eating its own tail. It's kind of the energy of the Ouroboros. It's like the snake eating its own tail. That's what happens when you get too lost in the energies of the North Node. And right now we have Pisces there with Saturn. And of course, Saturn is connected to lessons. It's connected to restrictions and restraint. But it's typically for some type of greater good. The thing about Saturn is that Saturn cares about how things affect other people. And that's why Saturn rules Aquarius. Saturn wants to do things for the greater good, for the collective, for other people to enjoy. Saturn wants things to be shared and delegated. And that's why we also have Capricorn being ruled by Saturn, which is about, systems and how systems work. That's Capricorn. So I think that once we have Saturn move into Aries, I also think that Pluto and Aquarius is relevant here because Pluto and Aquarius is really what triggers a lot of built up resentment towards the way that society is functioning and kind of a desire to change the systems that currently exist. So when we have Pluto and Aquarius, which is kind of the elevator music of all this other astrology that's happening, right? Pluto is really a symbol of the stage that society is at, the mindset that society is in, and the types of changes and shifts and what it's pointing towards, right? What are things trending towards? That's what Pluto can tell us, since it is such a generational planet. And so with Pluto and Aquarius, we understand that there is resentment towards society. And Saturn retrograde in Pisces is showing us that there is some type of despair that we need to acknowledge. We need to discover the root of this despair. And so doing that, there is this kind of like, as we go deeper and deeper, there's a lot of things being uncovered that you'd rather not find. It's kind of like discovering a shipwreck and you're searching for gold and you wind up finding something a bit scary, a bit ugly, a bit, monstrous even, right? There are a lot of things that hide at the bottom of the ocean, okay? And so that can be the energy of Saturn retrograde in Pisces. It's just a lot of things uncovering themselves that may be like we kind of wish that they stayed hidden. But it's important for those things to show themselves because it allows us to actually heal and move on and address the things that need to be addressed. And what Saturn does is it allows us to have discernment, and especially when it's in the sign of Pisces, Saturn in Pisces is with the North Node especially, is really showing us that we have to have discernment between empathy versus sympathy versus compassion, right? We can have empathy for other human beings, but in terms of extending our compassion and sympathy, we don't necessarily have to do that, okay? And, Saturn is representative of the underdog. Saturn is representative of the oppressed. Saturn represents the people that are outcasts, right? And so we have Saturn in Pisces retrograde with the North Node there, and, we're shifting towards Saturn's going to be in Aries in 2026, okay? We're kind of learning that, these, kind of like, in the same way that the mind is a muscle, empathy and our feelings are also a muscle. And I think the muscle kind of metaphor can really tie into Aries, which is about how we flex our muscles, right? It's literally about how, Aries and Mars energy is about where our strength comes from, right? And how we express that. And so when we have Saturn in Pisces and when we have Saturn about to enter Aries, we have this energy of completion. We have this energy of okay, we don't want to, tear our muscles, right? We don't want to overextend ourselves to the point where we break a bone, right? But we also need to practice using our empathy and having empathy, because if we don't, it's going to stop working, right? It's going to go numb. It is going to not be able to work anymore, right? It's going to become very rusty. And so it's important to keep our empathy very well oiled, if you will, even amongst all the chaos, right? And so, we have Uranus in Gemini, which I think that, of course, we know Gemini is such a little trickster, and, Mercury is a trickster planet. It loves stirring the fucking pot. Mercury is the messenger god, if you will. And so, there's a lot of chaos and there's a lot of disruptions. There's a lot of exits and entering and then exiting and disappearing and then bam and then disruption and then chaos. And so it can get really hard because it's this astrology it's almost tempting you to get caught up in getting upset and getting angry and being reactionary and reacting to every single thing. And it can be very, very, very draining. And I think that is where a lot of people's exhaustion is coming from. There's something very sleepy and exhausting about Saturn and Pisces, because Pisces is, of course, the subconscious, right? And so where does our subconscious speak? It speaks in our dreams when we're sleeping. And so there can be this very melancholic feeling that comes with Saturn and Pisces, especially with it retrograde. It's even a bit more potent, if you will, in my personal opinion. So don't allow yourself to get uprooted by this chaos that's happening, right? Eclipse season has really started with a freaking bang, to say the least. And so, especially with what the astrology is looking like for the rest of 2025 into 2026, okay, save your energy. Save your energy. You're going to need it. You are going to need it. So do not feel bad to just sit back and observe. And to just be like, I am just going to save my energy. I'm not going to let myself. This astrology is really showing us how to actually apply having empathy for other people in a way that is not harmful to other people and to ourselves. And so that means setting boundaries sometimes, right? Learning what is truly beneficial and what is actually destructive. Empathy should have boundaries. That is the nuts and bolts of the way that it works. That is how you apply the truth of empathy in the real world.